Hello, listeners. Welcome to the Kinship Chronicles, the podcast where we do a deep dive into pressing issues in the kinship program within Child Protective Services. I am your host, Stefan Martinez. I am a kinship program specialist within Child Protective Services.
Hi there, my name is Deanna Dahl. I'm a kinship program specialist with Child Protective Services, and I'm your co-host. Welcome to the Kinship Chronicles. I'm excited to talk about all things kinship.
The Kinship Chronicles is a space for the kinship caregiver community, the community where grandparents, aunts, uncles, and family friends step up to love a child when it matters most. You didn't expect this path, but you chose it. We'll bring you expert advice, some real-life stories, and the emotional support you need to navigate the big world of child welfare. We want you to know that you are not alone. You are a kinship hero. Now let's start the conversation. Hey listeners, welcome back to the Kinship Chronicles. On this episode, we're going to be talking about resources for informal kinship caregivers. And for today, we have a very, very special guest. We have Denise Smith from Texas Grandparents Raising Grandchildren. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Stefan, for having me here.
Hey, you want to give a little introduction about yourself and a little bit about what Texas GRG does?
Absolutely. Well, my name is Denise Smith, as you mentioned, and I am a mother of 5 adult children and also 8 grandchildren. And I have legal custody of 2 of them. And recently, my oldest grandchild, who is 19, is making me a great grandmother.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I'm happy about that one.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
So you mentioned about Texas GRG. So the acronym is TXGRG, Texas Grandparents Raising Grandchildren, is a statewide nonprofit organization that supports kinship caregivers, grandparents, aunts, uncles, siblings, fictive kin, and other relatives or trusted adults raising children when parents are unable to do so. We serve both formal and informal kinship caregivers and help families navigate resources, public benefits, education systems, legal questions, support groups, advocacy, and community connections. Our goal is to help stabilize families so that children can remain safely connected to family and community whenever possible.
And you mentioned formal versus informal. We had an episode already about formal kinship caregivers. So talk to me a little bit about what informal kinship caregivers is. What does that mean?
Yeah, absolutely, Stefan. Informal caregiver is someone who is raising a child outside of foster care or without a formal child welfare placement. That might be a grandparent, aunt, uncle, older sibling, family friend, or godparent who stepped in during a family crisis. Many informal caregivers do not have legal custody or CPS involvement, but they are still doing the day-to-day parenting, school, medical appointments, food, housing, emotional support, and stability. Often they step in overnight without preparation or financial support.
Yeah, that overnight piece is a really big part, right? Like sometimes it's just a phone call that you get, and then all of a sudden you're having to figure out the next steps. Taking in a grandchild, or a godchild, and figuring out where to go from there. Yeah, can you elaborate on that a little?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it was very different, but in the work that I do, we get calls all the time from caregivers stating, midnight, 3 a.m. phone calls, whether it's from the FPS, but mainly for maybe police departments who call them up and say, we need you to come get your grandchildren or whoever the child that they're placing at the time. And these children are pretty much placed with a family member without any clothing. Sometimes they might have a few handful things like a stuffed animal, blanket, maybe an outfit or 2, but majority of the time they are placed without anything, especially in the middle of the night.
It's always that in the middle of the night. It's interesting dynamic to get, because we get that all the time with caregivers saying that they got this call at 10 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock in the afternoon, or when we're having dinner, and it's just like you're having to figure out what to do after that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, Denise, with some of the conversations that you have with informal kinship caregivers, um, is there some things or some challenges that they face that um, maybe you want to bring to attention about or talk about a little bit more?
Yeah, that's a very important question, Stefan, because a lot of people don't realize that when you step up to the plate to take these children, you kind of have to start like, okay, now what do I do? You wake up thinking, okay, I started out with, I want to say, not a normal life, but your day to day life, and now it's been switched. So now you have to think about the extra individual in your home, or sometimes individuals. Sometimes they can be multiple children, not necessarily one. So,
Yeah.
one of the biggest challenges that informal caregivers are parenting without a roadmap. And many suddenly go from retirement or raising older children to parenting again. Sometimes, again, we talk about overnight. Common challenges include like the financial strain. A lot of our caregivers are elderly and could be on a disability check, a retirement check. It's very small, very structured budget that they have, and all of a sudden they have extra mouths to feed. The maybe they don't have a bed, an extra bed. I know with my grandchild, one of them was sleeping on the couch because we didn't have extra room for her.
As you normally do, like, especially with family, sometimes you just kind of make do and you'll sleep either on the bed or on blankets on the floor.
Exactly.
So it's kind of that. But then now it switches to like that overnight or weekend thing to like a more long-term situation. So I feel like you hit that financial strain conversation really well because especially nowadays, there's just the money can go so quickly with buying food and buying other things that the kids need. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It depends on the age too of the children. When they're small, it's different, but teenagers, they can eat you out of house and home.
Oh yeah.
And I have two of them left.
They really do love that
So,
food, and especially in the summertime, it just kind of goes even faster.
oh, definitely. That food bill definitely budget or doubles, I should say. Doubles. But another thing, Steph, I wanted to mention too on some of the challenges is the lack of legal authority. So if it's during the school year, trying to get the children, enrolled in school or to be able to make those educational decisions, medical decisions, even navigating trauma or behavioral needs. So depending on whether, if you have a child with special needs, that's also can be challenging. In the state of Texas, we call them ARDs for special education services, or there's a 504, or maybe there's unidentified disabilities for the children who are attending schools that no one ever has addressed before.
Wow.
So that's another thing. And then at the end of the day, you've got, sometimes difficulty accessing benefits, whether it's Medicaid, TANF, SNAP, um, sometimes child support or Social Security, depending how long term the stay is going to be for these children to be with their families. And so if it prolongs longer than originally anticipated, then you run into caregiver burnout and isolation.
Yeah, that caregiver burnout could be that presents itself a lot with informal caregivers, right? So I feel like we've had this conversation before and we've talked about it a little bit, but I remember you saying it's just continuous sometimes and these caregivers feel like it's just never going to end in certain situations. And yeah, talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, I can only speak for myself because I literally live it on a day to day. But when you don't have the support, and in my case, I have special needs grandchildren. So I had one that had a G-tube. So I didn't know anything about his condition, how to take care of him. So I had to quickly learn on how to do that and how to address his needs. So being able to take care of a special needs child or a medically special needs child, if you yourself having to learn it, then you require other people to help you. They have to learn it as well. They say it takes a village to raise a child, but sometimes that village is either very small or non-existent. So going to the grocery store by myself is very wonderful, but I know I have to hurry back, or, now that they're older, of course, sometimes even, wanting to take a hot shower after everybody goes to bed
Right.
is quite relaxing, but you have to wait. And sometimes when you are tired, that hot shower may sound good, but you're too tired to even take it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you became an expert on medical stuff, right? Like very quickly.
Absolutely.
And you had access to those resources, or like you looked into them or looked them up.
Yeah.
Ah,
So for me, Stefan, it was difficult in the beginning because when I got my grandchildren, my children at the time were very young. I had one with type 1 diabetes. I had another one who was literally just diagnosed with autism at the age of 10. So I was already navigating my own children's special needs. And now having a grandchild that I had never come across his medical condition, which they call esophageal atresia. Basically, he was born without an esophagus.
long words.
Yes.
But
Yes.
but I like that
But
you
yeah.
explained it a little bit more, because essentially he wasn't born with an esophagus.
Correct.
Right?
He was not born with one, and so which required the feeding tube. Also, they had to place a hole in its neck, which they call a spit fistula, because there was nowhere for the saliva to go through, which he
Okay.
could, it could go into the lungs. But of course, we know what would happen if that happened. So they had to create a hole in the neck so that the saliva would have a way to come out. And we got very, very creative with him, throughout the years of him growing up. But initially, we thought after maybe the first or two surgeries that he would be fixed. Unfortunately, that was not the case.
Yeah.
It took 302 surgeries later.
Wow.
And actually having to leave Texas to Boston Children's for him to be
Never just say that again. That 302
300.
surgeries.
And he's very proud to tell that number too when he
Yeah.
tells people, "I've had 302."
Like that's not one of those things where you icebreaker situations, like, oh, tell me something about yourself. Like, I've had 302. That's a crazy amount. That's a lot.
Absolutely.
And it kind of goes into, we're talking about the caregiver burnout a little bit, and that kind of goes into that. And yeah, is there anything else you want to talk about with that?
I just say, many families are doing everything they can to keep children safe, but are expected to navigate complicated systems with very little support or none at all. Like I said, I feel that in my situation with my grandchildren, the resources were there, but they were never made aware to me. It wasn't until years later that having to do my own research, not just about his medical condition, but also about the types of resources that were out there. And,
Yeah.
Even now, he just turned 17 yesterday. Even now, I tell people all the time, Stefan, that every day I learn something new, whether it's from me doing research for myself or a client themselves telling me something that they came across that I was not aware. Um, our lives are at different stages. So I can probably share my life experience up till the age of 17, or with my oldest grandchild up to 19. But anything beyond that, as far as raising a grandchild, will be very different for me. So I might look into another grandparent who is now, their grandchildren are in their 20s or 30s. I have a colleague who's doing it again with another set of grandkids because the first set are already in their 30s. And I couldn't imagine doing that
Right.
again.
Yeah.
So-
And you talked about going to someone else, going to another grandparent, and we've explained the support group, how like that supportive piece kind of goes into making things a little bit better and getting connected with that support group, talking to people that have gone through that same experience. And is that something that Texas GRG, or Texas Grandparents Raising Grandchildren, emphasizes?
Absolutely. We have, I believe we're up to about 23 support groups throughout the state of Texas. We have a couple that are virtual, one in the Dallas Fort Worth area that's virtual, but that doesn't limit who can join. It can't just be Dallas Fort Worth. Since it's virtual, it's anybody in the state of Texas. And we're recently starting one in the San Antonio area that we've extended into the summer. Typically, support groups in person or virtual usually stop when the school year stops. This will be our first kind of like a pilot to see how it works through the summer, but we're doing it a little bit different. We're going to be doing kind of like a workbook study group. I think, forgive me, but I think it's called something, the 7 Habits of Teenagers or something like that. Sean Covey, I believe, is the author. So because I have teenagers, I figured that would be a great book to start, something that I am familiar or experienced with. But I get calls from clients all the time that, they say, I went to the support group. And I hate to say it this way, but sometimes hearing the stories of other caregivers can go either or. You could look at it as, wow, I don't have it as bad as they do. Or, something of that nature. And like I said, a lot of the caregivers can have one child, two children. I have a client that has 10.
10 kids?
10. And she is very young. She's a very young caregiver. And I'm like in awe of her. Like, how is she doing it?
Right. And just driving around with 10
Mhm.
kids, that's gotta be a passenger of
No, okay. Well, it's funny that you say that, Stefan, because I had a 4-door sedan when I got my grandchildren, and I had to get a town and country. I had to get a minivan.
Yeah.
Because I had 3 car seats in the back at the time, and I had 3 kids, and not all my kids could fit in it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a lot of changes that have to be made, a lot of sacrifices too. When you're caring for the children and there's no financial support. At the time, I had one son in college who would use his tuition money to help.
Oh,
To make sure that I had diapers or extra formula or something or some clothes and stuff like that. And again, the resources are there, but they're not being tapped into because nobody's aware of them.
so when you talk to an informal kinship caregiver and they say, "Hey, I need support on these pieces," what resources are some of the go-tos for like getting those families to refer to them?
Well, there are more resources than people realize, but access can be confusing. Some common supports include, like I mentioned earlier, SNAP, Medicaid, TANA. We call it the child only grants. WIC for younger children is usually birth, to 5 years old. School supports, caregiver supports, local nonprofits. There's legal aid and community-based navigation organizations like us, like Texas DRG. The challenge is often not whether resources exist, it's knowing where to start and how to access them. So, for instance, SNAP, a lot of people call SNAP the food stamp program, or can help caregivers buy groceries. However, for informal caregivers, sometimes just being able to apply, a lot of our caregivers are elderly, so they're not very computer savvy, or they don't even use, smartphones, or they have a computer. So they are old school and they still go to paper applications. My understanding, some of these offices will say, you just fill out the paperwork and then, you know, they'll put it on the computer for them or something like that. Um, some of our community partners are very helpful. Like the San Antonio Food Bank is one of our biggest referrals where they can help the clients apply for the food stamps. And
Oh, awesome.
so that's one. Sometimes if they're very, say, homebound elderly, sometimes they'll go to them. So there are some community partners that will go out to the home to help fill out those applications and help them get those documents that they need to submit.
And you said that was through the food bank?
San Antonio Food
Right.
Bank, or any food bank, to be
Right.
honest with you. I mean, I'm in the San Antonio area, but it's any food bank in
Yeah.
Texas. I guess they have different names for it.
They do, and
Yeah.
they're spread out, and I I feel like people need to tap into those food banks more often, because especially in the summertime, they do a lot of drives and they do a lot of things that are available for families. But yeah, there's different names. But if you just look up food bank in your area, you'll probably find that.
Absolutely. And sometimes, even other agencies, when we do a referral, we'll go on their website and we can submit an online referral for the family. We get the family's permission, of course, because there are certain questions that are asked, and usually within 1 to 3 days they get contacted by theirs
Awesome.
by their team.
Okay.
So one of the other things too that they can also not just apply online, but they can apply by phone or in person. One important thing that we tell caregivers, if that the child lives with them, they may be able to apply for these benefits for the child, even when household situations are complicated. So typically with SNAP, it is based on household income.
Right.
So we let people know that ahead of time. We get a lot of caregivers that say, well, they denied me. One of the things that Texas GRG helped pass in legislation was the vehicle asset test. Many years ago, probably in the 70s, it was determined a certain value of your vehicle was a cap, but that stayed for, I believe, like, almost 50 years or something like that.
Yeah.
So a lot of people were getting denied just because the value of the car was too high for them.
Gotcha.
And so they felt like they were being penalized. So we're very thankful that bill was passed and a lot more families were able to qualify for that. Of course, we talked about step in WIC for children under 5. So that's another one. And they also go based on income, but we tell our families that if the child already has Medicaid, then it's an automatic approval.
And real quick, because you said WIC, that's women, infants, and children,
Correct.
correct? And
Yes.
what do they help out with?
So when usually if a person is pregnant, they'll help with like milk, tuna, uh, eggs, and stuff like that for the pregnant person. But when it's a child, it's the same thing. They'll help with the milk. Sorry about that.
You're good, you're
I'm
good.
trying to say 2 words at the same time. So they'll help with milk, cheese, cereal, different types, kind of the basics, necessities that children need to grow up and be healthy.
Okay.
So, and it's been so long for me, so I'm going to assume, or I shouldn't assume, but I believe they still do the appointments like every 3 months or stuff. A lot has changed since my kids have grown, so I have not had to be able to access those personally, but not. I think pretty much everything's still the same.
Yeah, because there's usually like a routine appointment checkup to see if there's anything different that that family or
Correct.
child may need, or adjustment to what their services that they're receiving or supports.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And then I think when the younger the child, they even help with baby food. So in baby food, what is it? Apple juice, all those types of little stuff in the different age stages of the baby food based on the child
yeah,
and the formula, of course.
gotcha. Yeah, that formula can be
Oh
expensive,
yeah.
especially if you're needing those. What is it? The purple can. It's always the one that has where it's like organic, or it's the
Honestly, I don't know, but I know my children were on special formula. My son who had type 1 was on a soybean formula.
by
My son with autism, before we found out, was on Nutramigen, that's something like that. And those type of special formulas require prescription. So the doctor would have to give you a prescription because it has to be approved by the state.
Gotcha.
Now, that's how it was years ago. I don't think much has changed since then, but because those, I think, are a little bit more pricier formulas.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You had talked about TANF and the you said child specific grant.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So, Stephen, in Texas, there's a couple of TANF programs, and this is where it gets complicated because of the way the system is now, it doesn't separate it. So when you apply, it just says, TANF. But one of the things is we have the one-time TANF for families of $1,000. And that's a misconception too, because a lot of people think, well, I just received this child, I can get that $1,000, but that is still based on household income. So the criteria depends on how much income is coming into the home. And it's also very limited on who can qualify. So grandparents, great grandparents. I want to say aunts and uncles, but I'm not really sure on that.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes. They added aunts, uncles, also if there's even great grandparents at one point weren't something. So definitely talk to TANF whenever you're doing that application to see if there's other
Absolutely.
things, because sometimes that changes, right? Like it
Exactly.
used to be only blood related, and now it's kind of expanded to
A little bit. Yeah, I think it
more
was
of
say like
yeah.
parents and grandparents, but yes, you're correct that some of the things. I know what we call fictive kin, someone who's kind of stepped in. Godparents, I believe they don't qualify, so it has to be pretty much within the bloodline. And but we also share with our families. The other one is the child only TANF, which focuses on the child's income and not necessarily the caregiver's income. So a lot of families get confused about that. They still have to provide their income, but the qualification is based on what income the child is getting, not on the household income. So with that one, even though typically children don't have income, but some of the income that is counted for them would be if they're receiving child support for the child, or let's say the child is on disability and is receiving SSI. Another one that is considered income is survivor benefits. So if a child's parents have passed away and they are receiving survivor benefits, that is considered income for the child.
Yeah.
So those are usually the three main ones that will affect a child from receiving the TANF.
Okay. Well, I feel like this has all been really really helpful. Is there any other resources that you think that kinship caregivers would benefit from, or like you want to highlight a little bit more on?
Yeah, absolutely, Stefan. The last one that I wanted to share is the one we haven't touched yet, and that's Medicaid.
Oh, that's right.
So, so we have a community partner in our area here. I know there's a couple of other ones throughout the state of Texas that we're still trying to connect with them to be able to serve the rest of the state. But they're out there, and there's a lot of agencies. But just like TANF, Medicaid is also another program that families can apply for that is based on the child's income and not necessarily the household income. Now, if the family has adopted these children, then that will affect them because that is considered a household income qualification. But if they have not adopted them, or they just have legal custody, conservatorship, as Texas calls it, then that does not require the household income. It again requires the child's income, which we spoke about um, on the three incomes that would affect that. But the threshold to qualify for Medicaid is a lot higher than the TANF. So
Okay.
I say the percentage of a child having Medicaid is a lot higher for them. And usually families who have at least one child on Medicaid and they have those children, say, like on their own private insurance, then there's a secondary program that they call HIP, Health Insurance Premium Reimbursement. So if they have them on their private insurance through their employer, then they can also apply to get qualified to get that reimbursement of their premiums back. And that can help tremendously.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. Um, it was a lot of information,
It is.
right? There's so much.
Now you can see why families are confused,
Yes,
don't know where to
yeah.
start. And that's where Texas GRG can come in and help them navigate.
Hey, I love that. Um, we're listeners, really quickly, we're just going to take a quick little break, and we will be right back. All right, listeners, and welcome back. And thank you so much for sticking around with us. We took a short break just to let that information digest a little bit. We know that the resources that we talked about were really important. It's just sometimes you just need to let that information sink in for a bit. So thank you for coming, joining us back for the break. Denise, let's talk a little bit more about our um, another support that y'all offer through Texas GRG for kinship caregivers.
So another one of the biggest things too that families, mainly informal caregivers, face is the legal challenges um, in the authority for being able to care for these children. Caregivers may be raising a child full time, but not have the legal authority to enroll them in school, consent to treatment, or access records or make long term decisions. We also see issues involving custody, safety concerns, family conflict, guardianship, power of attorney documents, and uncertainty about when legal intervention is needed. Excuse me. So for our caregivers, Stefan, for our clients, we help them kind of navigate where they need to go. Sometimes a non-parent authorization form is all that is required with certain school and medical situations.
Yeah.
Other times, legal custody or a court order may be necessary. Community organizations, legal aid, caregiver supports, and peer mentors can make a huge difference for those families as well. Um, at Texas GRG, we believe no caregivers should have to figure this out alone. So we do have a couple of community partners that help in those areas. But again, it's on a case by case basis on what the families need.
Yeah, and I really do appreciate that Texas GRG does help with navigating the families to those services, because in no way are we attorneys, right? Can't give you legal advice, but we can get you connected to the people that do that. But I love that you talked about the for school, that parent form. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So the non parent, they call it the non parent adult caregiver authorization form. And that's usually signed by the parents, a mom or dad, to act on behalf of the parent for the children. And that in itself goes such a long way. It doesn't necessarily mean that the caregiver has legal custody. I call it the permission slip for a caregiver.
That's a good way to look at
It
that.
is.
Oh, yeah.
It absolutely is. It's not necessarily a power of attorney either. It just has to be signed by a parent and notarized. And that form goes a long way for caregivers specifically. It does allow them to enroll a child in school. However, there is federal programs that also are can be used and utilized to enroll a child in school. But but as well, the biggest barrier is having to take the child to the doctor, immunizations, or the dentist, the eye doctor, all that requires consent of a parent or legal guardian. And so that becomes a little bit more difficult. And there's a lot of children out there that either had never had immunizations or they've never been to a doctor. Excuse me. And so with that, this paper can go a long way. So if a caregiver, if anything, try to get that one first. And that may be all they need. Now, the legal, authority, custody, that's a whole different situation. Consult an attorney about that because every case, every family situation is different.
Yeah. And sometimes we get requests about looking for attorneys or looking for legal advice. And one thing that we kind of strive to empower families or caregivers on is to reach out to 211. That service through and that, like, that search engine through 211 is such a great asset for anyone, and I think it's underutilized, right? Like, when you think about it, you're always told about those numbers, the 411, 211, all those numbers. But in actuality, when it comes down to like some of these pieces, you might forget about that. Um, do y'all send them to 211? Do y'all say, hey, this is another good resource?
Yeah, for other resources we do stuff and we'll refer them to 211 if we know something specific. So let's say they're looking for an attorney. Me personally, I will refer them to the bar association where they can find an attorney in their area. You can filter it to, if they're looking for a family attorney who does family law, or if they're looking for an attorney who deals specifically, we have, because again, we're dealing with elderly. A lot of these caregivers are looking into drafting wills for themselves, what to leave to their grandchildren. So that can filter out the type of, I don't want to say department, but
And you said that was the bar association?
so you have your Texas Bar Association. San Antonio has a bar association. I'm sure Dallas, Houston, Austin, all your big major cities will have one in their area as well. But that is basically a directory of all attorneys in the state of Texas.
Okay. Good to know.
Mhm.
Good to know. Now, is there anything else you want to talk to our listeners about regarding that?
As far as that in particular, uh, I think we've covered pretty much, but some of the things I want to share with caregivers to know that stepping in matters. You may not feel prepared, because I know I did not, but the love, stability, and connection you provide are incredibly important. At the same time, you should not have to struggle alone. Ask questions, seek support, and know that needing help is not a failure. And that's another thing that our caregivers, you know,
I would love for you to repeat that last line.
all right.
Yeah.
Know that needing help is not a failure. It is part of the journey. And kinship caregivers are often the quiet heroes holding families together.
They really are. I feel like reiterating that needing help or reaching out doesn't mean anything. And especially in social work and in our field, is we want to have um, caregivers letting us know when they're needing assistance with something, whether that's an informal caregiver or a formal caregiver that's involved in um, some sort of child protective service situation. But we want to know when you're needing that help so we can either give you the resources or, hey, the fact that you reached out means that you care. You're looking for things. You're trying to figure it out. So we want to reemphasize that you needing help is really uh, not a hindrance or not something that should be looked at as a negative. We really want the families to seek out the help when they needing that.
Absolutely, Stefan. I also truly believe that the more quiet is, caregivers out there reach out, the more our society will know what is needed. A lot of the times people don't know what's going on. And so they think everything's okay. As long as there's silence, no one's ever going to see the big picture. No one's going to know the magnitude of what's going on in Texas.
Yeah, yeah, good point. Now, Denise, to kind of before we talk about where we can find you on socials and find you in your organization, what else do you want our listeners to know about being an informal caregiver? Is there anything else?
No, actually, I mean, again, like I said, just continue to reach out, continue doing what you're doing, and don't I can't even think of in the other words that I want to say right now. I've been doing this for personally with my own grandchildren, uh, with the oldest fixing to be 20. It's been a long journey, and it is tiresome. It said we've made a lot of changes in our life. We've made a lot of sacrifices in our life. Um, you know, we need more support out there for us. A lot of support is out there for what we call the formal caregivers, but we need more support for the informal because we are stepping up. and doing what nobody knows what we're doing. So, and our children need just as much help as any other child in this country.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
I think that's about it.
Now, Denise, where can our listeners find you? On socials, on a website, by phone, by fax? Where can they find you?
Well, where can they find me? I don't know. No. People can connect with Texas Grandparents Raising Grandchildren online. We do have a website, txgrg.com, and follow us for resources, support groups, trainings, advocacy updates, community events. We also encourage caregivers to reach out if they need navigating systems or just want to know where to start. I believe we're on Facebook,
Yes.
Instagram. What are the other ones I can't think of?
I
What is it called? LinkedIn.
Oh, LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. We
Yes.
have that one.
I know y'all are very active on Facebook.
Yes.
We highlight a lot of things that are happening through Facebook and share a lot of y'all's content, which was really, really great. So, but I like that you put the website in there too, because that's another way to reach out to y'all. And so if they wanted to reach out to you, they can go to the Facebook page, Texas GRG Facebook page, and you just search that out and find that. We'll also include it in one of the comments on this episode, so that way they can reach out sooner and
Absolutely.
click that button. And anything no, I think that's pretty much it with the socials. I feel like we talked quite heavily about resources available for kinship caregivers, the informal kinship caregivers. We talked about SNAP, TANF, WIC, education a little bit, and then legal services. And one big takeaways that I kind of caught on to is that there needs to be more conversations around resources for informal kinship caregivers. And you were right about saying how if caregivers are quiet about what they're doing in regard to what they're needing with resources, the rest of the world won't know about what they're needing and what other things that what they're doing. So I just wanted to highlight that because that's such a big impact on the world that is informal kinship care. And yeah, I just want to reemphasize, if listeners out there, if y'all are needing some assistance, reaching out to Texas GRG on Facebook, or reaching out to us on here on the episode on the podcast. So lastly, I just want to greatly just thank Denise. Thank you so much for coming on our podcast today and talking and having this conversation about informal kinship caregivers.
Thank you, Stefan, very much. I really appreciate for you helping shed a light on informal caregivers.
Yeah. All right, listeners, we really do hope that you enjoyed this episode, and we will see you on the next one. Y'all have a good one.